Hey everyone, it's Peter Kerr from Daydream Nation, and I've got these wonderful gentlemen back to the show. I've got Stephen Schnee from the CD Junkie. Hello, Steve. How are you going?
Hello, Peter. Thank you for inviting me, and hello, Daniel.
Hello.
And hello, Bicyclelegs. How are you going?
Yeah, good.
We are going to do a show ranking the studio albums of Australia Crawl. So to be quite frank, Australia Crawl is not talked about a lot, either overseas or in Australia for that matter. I thought it'd be a good opportunity to get the lads back on the channel and rank from 4 to 1 the studio albums of Australia Crawl. So I might throw to you, Steve, to start proceedings off. What is your number 4 pick?
My number 4 pick would be Between a Rock and a Hard Place. This is a very strange Australian crawl record. It was, I guess it cost $400,000 to make. It doesn't sound like Australian crawl whatsoever. I would even call it the beginnings of James Rain's solo career. But it doesn't even sound like his solo career. It's a very odd record. It's got some great songs on it. I think it's a really good album if it was under another band name. It only features 3 of the band members. I think Simon and maybe Brad were in the band at the time. And it's just very electronic and very modern sounding, nothing like their rootsy sound from the previous albums. So as a regular album, I think it's really good. As an Australian crawl album, no, not so much.
Okay, no worries. Thank you for that. Bicyclelegs, what's your number 4 pick?
Yeah, it's a rock and a hard place as well. I have a funny feeling we're all going to agree on this one because it really is it does stand out like a sore thumb in the Australian crawl catalogue. It's not a complete stinker, but it definitely is not of the quality of those first 3 albums by any stretch. I mean, 2 Can Play is a good single. I always quite liked that when it first came on the radio and that sort of thing. 2 Hearts isn't a bad song, Always the Way. But on the whole, yeah, I mean, as Steve said, it just doesn't really sound like Australian crawl at all. And yeah, it doesn't sort of even point a finger in the direction of where James Rain would go with his solo career. You know, when you think of that first James Rain solo album and songs like Fall of Rome and that sort of thing, there's nothing here that really sounds like that either. So it really is an oddity in the collection. So yeah, that's going to be my number 4 as well. And yeah, as Steve pointed out, it was a financial disaster for the band. They wanted to break up after this album. They had to end up going out on tour for several months after this album came out just to pay off the debts that they incurred recording this album.
I don't mind the band changing at all. You know, the Stranglers did it. You know, the Stranglers went from this punky thing to, I mean, on the Feline album, you know, almost pretty songs. But when it's such a radical change and it doesn't seem like there's a real direction, like I said, I think this would be a great album if it was by a band called Schmiggity Doo. But under the name Australian Crawl, it just doesn't work.
Agreed.
Well, au contraire, my esteemed colleagues,
wow.
I am picking for the 4th one, Sons of Beaches. Now, there have been some albums in this little exercise that have gone up in my estimation, and some have gone down. And unfortunately, Sons of Beaches has gone way down in my estimation. I know it's got Mike Chapman, the producer extraordinaire. The production's very sparkly, but the songwriting to me is like a very tired 0-copy version of Sirocco, which is much superior. The song Downhearted is the strong track on the album. Love it. It's a great sort of ballady type of song. Love that. Was the radio hit in Australia. But as for the rest of it, it is kind of a lot of filler. You've got Letters of Zimbabwe, which is reggae and offbeat. Diane is kind of average. Shut Down wasn't a bad song. You had the famous vocal line about alimony, and it was a little bit angry. But to me, it was just very much trying to repeat the success of Sirocco, and albeit less successfully. So to me, Sons of Beaches is kind of a little bit jaded pub rock, and it doesn't have that sparkle, that that power pop sensibility that made the first couple of albums so wonderful. So Sons of Beaches, slightly controversial after you lads were absolutely toweling between Rock and a Hard Place. But that's why I'm a contrarian.
Exactly.
Over to you, Mr. Schnee. What's your number three?
Okay. My number 3 is Sons of Beaches. Very much for the same reasons. Mike Producer is normally, in my opinion, Mike Chapman is normally a great producer. I don't think that he gelled with Australian Crawl on this album. To me, the album, like with the first 2 albums, there was this it was a sound, wall to wall sound where there was space in between everything as well, and everything just sounded so great together. I felt that he just sort of condensed everything on this album, and it just, to me, it sounds really flat. This is the only time I've ever said that about a Mike Chapman production, I think. And like you, I think the songs aren't as good as the first 2 albums. But yeah, there are high points, especially Downhearted.
Right.
I think the band is trying, but I think they're sort of chugging along like they almost ran out of ideas. And I think that was really evident because the next release was an EP, and it's like they couldn't get, and there could have been some inner turmoil too, problems, within the band. I don't know, but it just fell flat for me. Although I still really like the album, but compared to the first 2, that's how I feel.
Yeah, interesting. Isn't it funny where you might have a producer and they put all the bells and whistles, but sometimes it can suck the essence out of what the band and the sonics that made it so special. And to me, those first couple of Australian Crawl albums have a little bit of grunginess to it. There's a little bit, everyone says that they're surf rock. They're actually much more, but it kind of, I don't know, there's some sort of X factor that the production kind of sucks out.
This was the first album that came out in America, by the way. So it did get released in the US, and I just remember sitting in every bin, apart from the record store that I went into, which was Licorice Pizza. I thought, I'll check this out. Thing that I felt about Australian Crawl is they were the likely successors to the sound of the Sports. I really thought that they took, the Sports had broken up, Australian Crawl took it. This sort of sucked that sound out a little bit. Like I said, I love Australian Crawl. I love Mike Chapman, but I don't think it gelled.
Yeah. No airplay for Downhearted or any tracks off this album? Shut Down?
Nothing got played anywhere.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that. Bicyclelegs, what's your number 3 pick?
Okay, looks like I'm going to be the slightly contrarian one here. But these top 3 for me, ask me on a different day, and they could be in a completely different order. They're all much of a muchness in quality for my personal taste. But for number 3, I'm going to go with the debut, Boys Light Up.
Ooh.
And the reason I'm going with this one slightly down there is just I've got slightly different ideas on the productions than you guys do, perhaps. I was listening to this just this morning, and the thing that struck me about the production on this album is it actually sounds quite light to me. It's got a very light touch. There's no sort of I don't know how else to put it. Also, the songs are good on this album, but I feel like the set list, the way they've put them, the song order could have been a lot better. I mean, they start off with songs like My Coffee's Gone Cold and Man Crazy and Way I've Been, which are fine songs. But why wouldn't you start off with something like Downhearted or Beautiful People or Indisposed? You know, these big, crunchy songs, or The Boys Light Up, the title track. You know, these songs are all sort of buried midway to 2/3 of the way through the album. So the order, the track order, I think they could have gotten a lot better, and I think it would have made it a better album. But this is still a really good album.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there's the funny thing with Australian Crawl too is that a lot of people don't realize is they were much more an albums band than a singles band in Australia, because you know, the only thing of theirs that made the top 10 was the Semantics EP that we'll talk about a little later.
Reckless.
Yeah, that went to #1. None of these, even though these songs, you know, Boys Light Up, Beautiful People, you know, they all get massive radio airplay. They did at the time. They still do now on classic rock radio. But they never made the top 10 in Australia.
Top 20.
Top 20 they did, but
Yep.
top 10 they did not.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's a funny thing. But still, this is a great album, as are the next two. But this one just slightly below the other two for me, just because, as I say, the production's a little light and airy for my taste. And secondly, the order of the tracks could have been a lot better, made it a lot better album.
Yeah. No, well, thanks for your take on that. And if you don't mind me setting you a little mini homework assignment, when this clip goes out, do you mind putting in the comments your track order of what you would like?
I'll have to give it another couple of listens and try and
yeah, but I'd be interested to see,
but,
because the track listing can make or break a listening experience. Okay, thank you for that. All right, well, cat's out of the bag. This album, Between Rock and a Hard Place, I have been listening to this for the last 2 months, because we've had a couple of stabs at trying to get this show up and running, and I've grown to kind of really like it. I've got a real soft spot for it. Yes, it's overproduced. Yes, it's got bells and whistles of the 80s, but there's some really, really good songs. And I think it's artistically brave. They're doing something different. I don't mind if bands being musically adventurous, going out on a limb, as long as they can back it up with the songs. And there's some really decent songs. Two Can Play, you've got dance, R&B, you've got a bit of samba. You've got Divers Down, you know, If This Is Love, that's like an old time swing. And the big complaint about Australia Crawl is James Rain's vocals and his diction, because he's got this very, how would you say, it's kind of like his use of the vowels in diction kind of is like a drawl. And people say, what is he singing about? But this, out of all the albums, is the cleanest production where you can actually hear some clear diction. You can actually hear the lyrics. Two Hearts is a beautiful, heartfelt ballad, and it's got some of James Rain's best vocals. I don't know if I just said it, I'll say it again. I think James Rain's best vocals may be on this album. Between, what's another one? There's a lot of alternative country. And I think James Rain had a little bit of a minor hit later, didn't he, with James Blundell, Way Out West, the old Dingo song. So that was a direction that he was looking for, you know, to get into the alternate country scene. So I find this album is just wildly creative, because you've got all these different types of musical genres, you know, swing, samba, dance, R&B, alternative country. Now, there was an original version of this album that they were going to put out, and apparently it was quite stripped back. It was straight ahead rock and roll, and it had minimal brass. But I think the record company, and they got very excited with a $400,000 budget, which you said at the outset of the show, Stephen, and the Sonics came out as they are on the album to this very day. So, yes, there was only 3 of the band members left. You had Rain, Brad Robertson, and Simon Binks. Simon Binks, he's a really underrated guitarist. Some of the guitar licks all the way through Crawl and this
Absolutely.
album are sublime. But look, when I first heard this in the day, everyone sort of just had this narrative. This is a disaster. It didn't chart anywhere. And I think it was an album that was ahead of its time, because people that were brought up on the Oz Crawl of old, that driving hard pub rock type of surf rock band, weren't prepared to hear something that was a little bit creative and out there. But anyway, that's my number 3 pick. Bit controversial, between a rock and a hard place, and it needs some more love. And I'm glad that it's in wide circulation on vinyl. You can get it everywhere in
See,
Australia.
again, I am searching for it on CD. It's just too pricey, but I do enjoy the album. But again, it just doesn't feel like an Australian Crawl. And I love when bands are adventurous. So yeah, I'm totally going to agree with you on that. That's why I love James Rain's voice, and so yeah, this is an album that hopefully I will eventually find on CD.
Yeah. It's not a perfect album, folks, by any mean. It has flaws. And the big flaw to me is another component of Australia Crawl that I really enjoy is the drumming and the bottom end. And there's no drumming and bottom end on this. It's a little bit electronic and a little bit thin on the bottom end. It's a little bit toppy and mid-range and toppy, so they can put all the embellishments. And it's not a perfect album, but to me, the songs are much more interesting than Sons of Beaches. So anyway, it's a contrarian view. Okay, Stephen, what's your number 2 pick?
My number 2 pick is the debut, The Boys Light Up. This, I think as I was saying a little bit earlier, and maybe a little prematurely, that I was a big sports fan. Stephen Cummings and when that band split up, this is a band that I discovered through Sons of Beaches. Now, I wasn't enthused by Sons of Beaches when that came out in America, but then I found the import of this and other stuff, and that's when I obviously fell in love with it on vinyl. I agree to a certain extent with Bicyclelegs about the track order, but I do love that production. I'm not going to say it's raw and it's not heavy, but it's very appealing. It's very easy to get into, and just there's so many great songs on this. Of course, the original Downhearted, Beautiful People, Indisposed, which is great. All these are great. Boys Light Up. But yeah, I think that mix the songs around and you've got an album that's a lot stronger. But yeah, I'm gonna go with that as my number 2 favorite Australian Crawl album.
Nice, thank you. Bicyclelegs, what's your number 2 pick?
My number 2 is going to be Sons of Beaches. I actually like the production on this album. I think it's the hardest rocking Australian Crawl album out of the 4, which is, that's not really what Mike Chapman was renowned for. So I think people were a little bit surprised when this album came out. Mike Chapman was very known for doing pop records.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not a pop record. This is a rock record. And I love, the songs that got played on the radio, I absolutely loved. The re-recording of Downhearted, I don't know whether I like that one better than on the debut or not, but it's a good re-recording. It's not a butchering at all. But you've got Runaway Girls, which I really like, Daughters of the Northern Coast. That used to get quite a bit of airplay here in Brisbane. And I always really, really love that song. Shut Down, I think, is one of their top 5 best singles. Absolutely love it. But, other things like, Not So Happy song for problem children, that one sort of has a dark humor to it, which I really, really like. And I like Diane. I like Midlife Crisis. I don't even mind the sort of reggae of Let It from Zimbabwe. I think it's a good album, and I really, as I said, I like the production on this album. It's not a typical Mike Chapman production by any stretch, but I think it has a sort of a not metal sort of heaviness, but it's a harder rocking album than any of the Australian Crawl albums, in my opinion, and that's why I really really like it. And it almost was my number one, so I was going to be even more contrarian, but it just it's a real coin flip between my number one and my number two. But I think it's a great album. I really really like Sons of Beaches.
I think I'm the only non-contrarian here, aren't I? I'm pretty straight down the middle, I think.
Possibly.
Mike Chapman did a few rocky albums, though. Bicyclelegs. You can't call the Knack that kind of rocked out. And his work with Blondie. I don't know if I totally agree with that comment.
Yeah,
I think there was a lot of his work was kind of on the rocky side of pop.
I don't know, the Knack maybe, but I mean, those Blondie productions are wonderful. But he definitely gave them a pop sheen that they didn't have on those first couple of albums. I mean, those first couple of Blondie albums are quite punky, and he kind of smooths that over on. And I still love those I love those Blondie albums, but he definitely gives them a more radio-friendly sound, I think, than they had on their first couple of albums.
Yeah, look, radio-friendly, but still on the right edge of a little bit of grit. Maybe I'm sort of slightly contrarian on that. Okay, no worries. Well, my number two is, like Mr. Schnee, Australia Crawl, The Boys Light Up. So this was my introduction to the band. Don't you just love that album cover? And they're the boys there. They were kind of pop idols, The girls just love James Rain, and he was very much the anti-pop idol. He was a little bit surly in interviews and tried to get away with that and be regarded as a serious artist. But this was the introduction to me to Australia Crawl. Beautiful people, or beautiful people, was the
very unique vocalist.
That was the lead single. I love that single. I had the choice, Stephen, between buying that or My Sharona, because it came out in the similar time, and I used my pocket money to get My Sharona. But I always like Beautiful People. I like that. One thing people forget is the lyrics of this band are quite sharp and witty. A lot of it is not just bogans and beers and barbecues. It's, they did a lot of witty satirical lyrics about the social classes, examination of relationships. Like Beautiful People is about the Toorak set, which is like the rich and famous, or the Beverly Hills set in Melbourne. The Boys Light Up. That is such a cheeky song. And the thing that gets me is the harmonica line. And there was a show that was playing in Australia. It was about Shane Warne, famous cricketer, and that was sort of the soundtrack to the show, wasn't it? Bicyclelegs, and that actually got my interest to say, "Oh, Australia Crawl, this is a great song. Maybe we should do Australia Crawl show." But I love that everything about that song is just cheeky and really pushing the boundaries. And a lot of people have asked James Rain, what is it actually about? And he said it was about, schoolboys behind the back of the toilets having a smoke at high school. But there's been other interpretations as well. Chinese Eyes, that's got like a Bob Seger feel to it. It's got boogie piano. I like that. And then you compare it to Walk My Way, which has got 60s pop and it's like garage rock. Way I've Been, that's like a jaunty little rocker. It's upbeat and it's got some nice finger picking of Simon Binks. But I think the songwriting on this album is just really, really good. And it's definitely top shelf Australia Crawl, and went to number 4, 1980. And I think the production's very much of the times. It was produced by David Briggs, who was in the LRB, I believe. And I think a lot of the production, very similar to, a lot of albums that were coming out at that time. I don't think it would have been any better if it had that sparkling Mike Chapman production of Sons of Beaches 2 years later. Anyway, that's my number 2, Boys Light Up. All right, Stephen, I think the game is up. We know what your number 1 is, mate. So
I
Throw
think
it
it's
up.
everybody's number one.
Yes.
Now it's the album that I still don't know the proper. I thought it was Sirocco. Some people call it Sirico. I call it Sirocco. It is an incredibly wonderful album. Just there's the back cover of it. It's certainly my absolute favorite Australian crawl album. There is one album that I think is better, but I'll tell you about that later. And it has, and it's an American only album, but it's chock full of great tunes, and the stuff that they introduced on the Boys Light Up or the Boys Light Up album, they just totally brought to the forefront on this album. And this is one that for years has just received constant play from me, more than the other ones, and probably just as much as like the hits collections and stuff. It's just solid from beginning to end. I love this album to death.
Nice. All right, Mr. Bicyclelegs, what's your number one? Throw it up.
Well, it's everybody's number one, isn't it, Sirocco? Look, this was a tough one, but I listened to this album again this morning, just as a last minute thing. And it just, as it was playing, it was just undeniable. It had to be number one, especially side one. Side one of this record is flawless.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you start off with Things Don't Seem, you know, then you've got Unpublished Critics, which a lot of people have said, you know, Guns N' Roses took that and kind of ripped it off for Sweet Child of Mine. And you can hear Sweet Child of Mine in that song if you listen to it.
Yes.
But it's a wonderful song. Love Beats Me Up is great. Oh No, Not You Again. You know,
which is
one
Helpless.
Of the things, yeah.
Same chord progression as Helpless, you know, by what was that, CSN or CSNY, but same chord progression as a lot of stuff. But it's wonderful song.
And I love Guy Madonna, his vocals on, you know, the songs that he sings on this album. It's nice to have. I love a lot of bands that have more than one lead singer. Yeah. And as much as I love James Rain's a great lead singer. I've got to quickly sidetrack here, Peter. You talked about Beautiful People on Boys Light Up. I used to know somebody who honestly thought that song was not just beautiful people. She actually thought it was just nonsense lyrics. She thought it was yo, debo bebo. That's all she heard. So
like Sesame Street, like mana mana.
Yeah, that sort of thing. Yeah. But anyway, you know, and then Lakeside.
I'm never going to be able to hear that song the same now.
Yeah. But Lakeside closes out side one, and side one is just absolutely flawless, as I said. Side two is very good. It's not quite flawless like side one is, but side two is still very, very good. I mean, it's got Errol, which, you know, again, wasn't a top 10 hit here, but it got played so much on radio and on music clip shows. And again, wonderful Guy Madonna vocal, you know, but you've got Easy on Your Own and Love Boys and Resort Girls. It's just, yeah, it's a great album. And, you know, as much as I love the other albums, this one had to be number one. So, yeah.
Now, I know that Guy McDonough died in 1984.
Yes.
Was that you see, because over here, remember, Australian Crawl was nothing. They didn't get airplay. Well, I'll tell you about airplay in a minute, but what kind of impact did the band have on the charts there? Or maybe you can tell me that after you talk about your number one, but what kind of impact did the death of Guy McDonough, or had they sort of not been in the news that often?
It was in the news. It had a major impact, and emotionally it did tear the band apart. There's been a lot of death with this band, because you had Brad Robertson, who was the other arguably heartthrob in the band, that also passed away. So a lot of tragedy in this band, and but the Guy Madonna definitely had a lot of sort of media airplay and definitely affect the band in big ways.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I would argue that the band were never quite the same again, because even though Guy McDonough wasn't on that first album, on The Boys Light Up, he had songwriting contributions on that album.
Spiritual. He was like the spiritual center of the band, maybe you
Yeah.
could say.
Yeah.
And I mean, after this album, you know, after he died, you know, they did the Semantics EP, and then they did Rock and a Hard Place, and then it was over. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, it really did, you know, rip the band apart. And, you know, just before he died too, his brother Bill, who was the drummer, the original drummer in the band, had left as well after the Sons of Beaches album. And I think that was a huge thing for them too, because he was not just the drummer in the band, but he was also an integral songwriter in the band as well.
Yeah, his drumming is phenomenal. That's one thing that I hear all the way through. The drumming is just drives it along. Musical wise, the musicianship of this band is top notch, and you have to be, you know, playing the pubs, because they would be playing up and down the coast. Every beer barn in Australia they would be playing, and you've got to hone your craft and be, you know, the musicianship is just 100%. But not a surprise. There you go. Isn't it got that cheap trick in living color? You've got the good-looking guys here, and then you've got the what are we doing on the back cover? But I mean, if you've got to put the two brooding, good-looking guys, you put it on. James Rain doesn't look happy, doesn't he? Go, oh, all right, 1, 2, 3, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
But what can I say about this album? It's great. Things Don't Seem. What a cracker of an opener. And this is the one which is the most cryptic James Rain lyrics with the diction. So I thought it'd be fun if I could just give you a little excerpt from the lyrics. Prospect of a reconciliation, memories of some funny conversation, feel like taking a vacation, like going to the moon, I can't afford it. So just a little bit of clarity for you folks. You may not have known that there are some lyrics that I'm able to decipher. It's just a great, and the guitar solo with Simon Blinks. It's really, I think he's got a little bit of metal in him. He's a little bit, you know, some really great, you know, sort of guitar technique on that song. Unpublished critics, GNR. But somebody has put on the internet that this song may have been influenced by another band called Canis Major, Butterfly Queen. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of that song.
No.
Maybe just look that up on YouTube. Very similar. But look, the way I see it, I think that, you know, we're in a small pond, Australia. There's a lot of creativity. There's bound to be some coincidences. I'm not sure that Guns N' Roses actually heard it. Like Slash, it was pointed out to Slash. He heard it and he goes, oh, uncanny. They were working in their own parallel universe, and I don't think they were actually, you know, knew who Australia Crawl was. So that's my take on it. Errol, it's got a bit of a Police vibe, the drumming on Errol. Do you notice that the Police is a very influential band in the early 80s, especially in Australia, and you have all these little reggae bits and tinges. A lot of commercial radio was playing that sort of music, and it pops up on this album. Easy on Your Own is starting to see the alt country come out, where James Rain loves. Lakeside's a brilliant song, but this is heads and shoulders their best album. And the producer was Peter Dawkins, who did Dragon, Air Supply, and I think this was their biggest selling Australian album, Bicyclelegs.
Yeah, it was in the top 20 of the album chart for something like 8 months. It was just like, I remember going to my local record store, you know, I was like, you know, 10 years old at the time, and they would just have displays of it, you know, in the windows for months and months and months. It was just, it was a huge album.
Wow.
Yeah. All right, I'll throw it over to Steve. So in America, folks, there were a lot of Australian releases that turned into hybrid albums, which would be a merging of a couple of different releases into one album. Skyhawks, Hunters and Collectors, they're just some acts that just come to mind where a couple of their studio albums, they just cherry picked the best songs that they thought and just merged it into one. That happened in America, and this happens to be your favorite Ozcrawl. So tell us a bit about this one.
Now, this was released as an EP in Australia, 4 tracks. Now, this here is that EP. This is not a US version of the album. Never came out on CD. But what they did in America is they took those 4 tracks and they re-recorded 6 of their older songs. And then they put them together, had the same album title, same album cover, different back cover. And they created an American-only album called Semantics. And actually, there's a very influential radio station here called KROQ. And KROQ actually played The Boys Light Up. They put that into light to medium rotation when it first came out. They didn't play Reckless or anything else off the album, but Boys Light Up actually got significant airplay. And I was surprised as heck when I found out that it was coming on. It came out on Geffen, of all labels, and so that American album is actually my favorite. I'm not saying it's better than Sirocco. How do you guys pronounce it?
Sirocco.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Because I live in Stupidville.
No, you don't.
But the American version of Semantics. So I'm encouraging any American viewers of the show, if you're flipping through the bins, because it never came out on CD, but it did come out on cassette and LP. So I'm recommending you check that out, because that and Sons of Beaches are the only things that you're really going to be able to find easily here in America. But that is just an amazing record.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Yeah.
And Bicyclelegs, maybe you can throw up some of the live albums and we can have a little bit of a chat about
I'll
that.
quickly talk about Semantics myself, though, because this is my favorite Australian Crawl thing, even though it's only an EP. All 4 songs on this album are just, on this EP, are just absolutely crackers. White Limbo is my favorite Australian Crawl song ever. With no exceptions. I absolutely adore White Limbo. It doesn't sound like a lot of other Australian Crawl stuff. They're definitely getting adventurous on this EP. But yeah, absolutely love it. But they did do a couple of live albums. Just after Guy McDonough had passed away, they brought out the Phalanx live album with Michael Leunig artwork. There's a picture on the back of James Rayner as a Michael Leunig character. But yeah, I mean, Michael Leunig himself, a famous cartoonist here in Australia. But yeah, it's a really good live album. From this album, they released their version of Louie Louie, which did quite well. They were very famous in live concerts for doing Louie Louie. And in fact, on their last live album, which is The Final Wave, this came out after Between a Rock and a Hard Place. I think it was kind of a contractual obligation. And again, also trying to recoup the money from Between a Rock and a Hard Place. It has a version of Louie Louie on it as well. So the track listings between these 2 live albums are quite similar. That's the only disappointing thing about them. But they're both really good live albums. I would probably prefer Phalanx over The Final Wave, but they're both really good live albums and definitely worth checking out if you can find them.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe I'll do a quick just to go around the grounds. Well, what's your favorite? I know Bicyclelegs, you said your favorite Australia Crawl song. Stephen, what's your favorite Australia Crawl song?
Well, before I do that, there are plenty of Australian Crawl compilations out there. Here's just 3 of them on CD. all pretty similar track listings. And I'm not going to go through them all, but I am going to point out that James Rain has one heck of a solo catalog as well. And then there's also compilations that feature James Rain solo and Australian Crawl. But I'm going to go wimpy here on Australian Crawl, and didn't get any airplay here, but I'm going to say Reckless is probably my favorite. But after the show, I'm probably going to go, you know what? It might be Oh No, Not You Again. But right now I'm going to say Reckless is my favorite Australian Crawl song.
It's mine too. I think it's a masterpiece of a song.
Yeah.
And when you look at the lyrics, a lot of people don't realize it's a song about drug addiction.
Mm-hmm.
It's about a guy that's on the Manly Ferry traveling to get a hit. And there's some historical comparisons about Mawson's journey I think in the South Pole. There's all these other sort of metaphors, but yeah, a lot of people were listening to the main lyrics and thinking, throw down your guns, and thinking it's like maybe it might be a message song, but it's actually about drug addiction, which I only just found out recently in doing some research for another show that I did on Rock Daydream Nation a couple of months. But I think it's a masterpiece, and the beautiful acoustic guitar work, and it's kind of stripped back and a minimalist. This is a creative band, and they're a bag full of surprises, because a lot of people have this image of the bronze James Rain and that sort of surf rock good time band, but there's a lot of grit. There's a lot of, you look at the lyrics and you look at their musicology. They're not what you think is straightforward rock. There's a lot of they go off on different tangents, and there's a lot to enjoy. I'll put something to you guys. My opinion, and this might be controversial, they haven't made a masterpiece 10 out of 10 album. I think the best album is probably the Crawl File is their greatest hits. Because I think in each of the albums there is a little bit of fun. That's a masterpiece of an album, because that would be the one I would recommend to folk, because it's got all of their hits. I think they're more of a greatest hits band, but in regards album to album, I don't think there's any that I would put in the top 50, 100, 200 Australian albums of all time. I think there's always a little bit of filler. What do you think about that, Bicyclelegs?
I do think I would definitely recommend to people, if you're only going to get one Australian Crawl album, I would probably go with Crawl File. I think that's their best of. But yeah, it's hard to, I think the albums, if you really enjoy Crawl File or one of the other best ofs, then I'd say go and dive into the albums, because I think they're all really, really good. But I definitely think they're a band that you're better off starting with a best of and then moving into the catalog, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Stephen, do you agree that none of their albums are probably masterpieces? They're good, but probably their greatest hits is probably the reference point you'd recommend.
Yes. And the thing is, you say that, that this would be the album. At times, like, for some reason here in America, you can get this online for really cheap, for like $5. So somebody had like an overstock of it or something. And this has 19 tracks. And see, this has more songs than Crawl File. So I definitely recommend that, or More Wharf, that has 17 tracks. But at the same time, I really like the order of the songs on Crawl File. So I would say any of the compilations work, but I'll stand in agreement that Crawl File would probably be a pretty darn good gateway album.
Absolutely. And that actually went to #1 in Australia too.
Oh, did it?
At the top of the charts for a considerable period of time. So they actually had 3 #1s, 2 studios and 1 greatest hits, which came out quite early in the day, didn't it? Bicyclelegs, mid 80s or
84, I think.
Yeah, pretty early in their discography to put a greatest hits album out. So
yeah, but that was after Guy died, right?
I believe so.
That was probably a stopgap. Well, actually, you know what? No, because this does have Reckless on it.
Yes.
So I was going to say this was a stopgap album. So I guess it was a stopgap before Between a Rock and a Hard Place.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much, guys. I think we've summed up the Australia Crawl discography really well. Folks at home, tell us what you think of Australia Crawl. What are your favorite songs? What are your favorite albums? Stephen Schnee, check out his show on the CD Junkie. Bicyclelegs, wonderful show dropping every Saturday night at 10 p.m. Look it out on YouTube.
In fact, just this very Saturday, well, it'll be after that by the time this video comes out, but Steve and I have a 10cc video that is coming out this weekend, so definitely check that out.
Absolutely, check it out. And this little channel, I was
going to say, hang out on Rock Daydream Nation for the next 2 hours, because we'll be going through all of James Rain's solo albums. No, not really.
We'll talk about that offline. Please like and subscribe to this little channel called Rock Daydream Nation. We get a lot of folk all around the world and just talk music because that's what we like to do. We're not professionals, we're amateurs, and we just love talking music. That's what it is. So please like and subscribe. But one thing's guaranteed, you'll see these gentlemen on a show on Rock Daydream Nation very soon. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.